Look at the person sitting across from you. If you are dealing with a classic narcissist, they think they are the apex predator in the room. They operate on a predictable predatory script: isolate, exploit, and discard. They scan the environment for warmth, openness, and deep empathy, viewing these traits as structural vulnerabilities. When they lock eyes with a super empath, their internal radar flashes a green light. They think they've found the ultimate well of emotional supply, a target they can drain indefinitely. But they are suffering from a catastrophic error in behavioral profiling. What the narcissist fails to understand, and what ultimately seals their fate, is that the super empath is not a victim. They are a behavioral outlier. Standard empathy is reactive. It feels what others feel and often absorbs the blow. Super empathy is highly perceptive, deeply analytical, and acutely aware. While the narcissist believes they are successfully playing their game of manipulation, the super empath is quietly executing a passive data collection phase. They see the micro-expressions. They note the inconsistencies in syntax. They map the fragile ego hidden beneath the grandiose mask. They understand the narcissist's psychological architecture better than the narcissist understands it themselves. The narcissist enters this dynamic with a sense of absolute control, completely blind to the fact that they have walked into an emotional trap of their own making. They believe their eventual, inevitable betrayal will break the empath, just as it has broken so many others before. They anticipate the tears, the pleading, the desperate attempts to fix the relationship, the exact emotional reactions that feed their fragile sense of superiority. They have no idea that this specific betrayal is the exact trigger that alters the empath's operating system. In the next few minutes, we are going to deconstruct exactly what happens when that betrayal occurs. You will see the precise mechanical failure that takes place inside a narcissist's mind when their predatory script flips against them. We are going to look at the cold, hard behavioral science of why this specific mistake doesn't just hurt the narcissist, it permanently dismantles their psychological framework, leaving them entirely unable to rebuild the illusion of control they spent a lifetime creating. If you have ever wondered why a narcissist seems utterly terrified of, yet obsessed with, the one person they could never truly break, pay very close attention to the mechanics of this shift. Every predator operates under the assumption that their environment is predictable. For a narcissist, human beings are not individuals, they are variables to be managed, resources to be harvested. They look for high-value targets, people with deep emotional reservoirs, people who possess an extraordinary capacity to care. When a narcissist encounters a super empath, they believe they have hit the jackpot. They see the profound kindness, the deep intuition, and the relentless willingness to understand others, and they immediately categorize it as compliance. They think, here is someone I can exploit without consequence. It is the single greatest operational mistake they will ever make. You see, a super empath possesses a highly specialized psychological framework. Their empathy is not a soft, fragile sentimentality. It is a powerful, active radar. While the narcissist is busy running their standard manipulation playbook, the love bombing, the subtle gaslighting, the manufactured crises, the super empath is processing the data. They aren't just feeling the narcissist's energy, they are reading it. They observe the slight hesitation before a forced smile. They track the shift in vocal tone when control is threatened. Because the super empath operates from a place of radical authenticity, they can spot a counterfeit persona instantly. Yet, for a long time, they choose to extend grace. They offer understanding, hoping to connect with the fractured human being beneath the armor. The narcissist mistakes this patience for weakness. They grow arrogant. They begin to believe their own myth of invincibility. And then, driven by their compulsive need for validation and dominance, they deliver the blow. They betray the super empath. It might be an act of infidelity, a public smear campaign, or a calculated, cold-hearted discard. The narcissist stands back, expecting the emotional fallout. They wait for the panic, the weeping, the desperate bargaining. They have their response lined up to maximize the empath's pain. But instead of the expected reaction, they hit a wall of absolute freezing silence. The moment the betrayal is executed, a profound cognitive shift occurs within the super empath. It is a systemic shutdown of access. The empathy that once flowed unconditionally is instantly cut off at the source. It is not an act of anger. It is not a dramatic retaliation. It is something far more terrifying to a predator: total, objective detachment. The super empath stops looking at the narcissist as a partner, a friend, or a loved one, and begins looking at them purely as a behavioral specimen. Suddenly, the narcissist is completely cut off from the emotional supply that sustained their ego. The mirror that once reflected a beautiful, idealized version of them is gone. In its place is a flat, unyielding window that sees right through their lies. When the narcissist tries to provoke a reaction, they are met with calm, unblinking observation. The gaslighting no longer works because the empath's memory and perception are locked down by rock-solid logic. The guilt trips fail because the empath has completely decoupled their self-worth from the narcissist's opinion. This is the exact point where the narcissist's psychological architecture begins to fracture. A narcissist requires control to maintain their sanity. When they realize they can no longer elicit any emotional response, neither love nor hate, neither joy nor anger, they experience a severe systemic crisis known as narcissistic mortification. They are forced to confront the absolute emptiness of their own core. They try to move on, they try to find new targets, but the ghost of the super empath haunts their psychological framework. Why? Because every subsequent target feels hollow compared to the depth of the supply they lost. More importantly, they carry the permanent, terrifying awareness that there is someone out there who knows exactly who they are, who cannot be manipulated, and who looks at them not with hatred, but with profound, indifferent pity. By betraying the super empath, the narcissist doesn't win a game of power. They permanently lock themselves out of the only genuine sanctuary they ever found, leaving their ego broken, exposed, and entirely destroyed forever. To understand the sheer magnitude of the tactical error a narcissist makes when targeting a super empath, you have to look closely at the mechanics of predatory profiling. A classic narcissist is, by definition, a behavioral predator. They do not navigate the world through genuine connection. They navigate it through assessment, leverage, and acquisition. When they enter a room, their internal radar is actively scanning for specific psychological assets. They look for high-value targets, individuals who possess a deep, almost inexhaustible reservoir of emotional warmth, validation, and psychological resilience. This is what they call high-quality supply. When their radar locks onto a super empath, the narcissist's internal system registers a massive positive signal. They see an individual who listens intently, who validates others effortlessly, and who demonstrates a profound capacity for patience and understanding. To the superficial analytical framework of the narcissist, these traits are immediately cataloged as structural vulnerabilities. They look at the empath's willingness to give, their open body language, and their natural inclination to look for the good in people. And they misinterpret this entire psychological profile as a lack of boundaries. They assume that because this person is gentle, they are weak. They assume that because this person offers grace, they lack the capacity for self-defense. This is a fatal miscalculation in their profiling matrix. What the narcissist fails to grasp is the distinction between ordinary emotional reactivity and conscious emotional intelligence. Standard empathy can sometimes operate as a liability. It can be reactive, easily manipulated by guilt, and prone to absorbing the emotional toxic waste of others. But super empathy is an entirely different operating system. It is a highly advanced, perceptive, and deeply analytical framework. The super empath does not possess weak boundaries. They possess wide, highly conscious boundaries that they choose to lower deliberately out of an authentic desire for human connection. The narcissist, blinded by their own grandiosity, cannot conceive of a person who is powerful precisely because they are kind. They see the empath's patience not as a conscious choice, but as a compliance mechanism that can be exploited indefinitely. They believe they have found the ultimate target, someone they can slowly isolate, systematically exploit, and eventually discard without ever facing a true counter-strategy. The narcissist enters the dynamic with absolute confidence, completely unaware that they have misread the baseline data. They are operating on the assumption that they are the apex predator in the environment, entirely blind to the reality that the super empath's emotional depth is backed by an equal measure of psychological strength, pattern recognition, and acute observation. The narcissist's arrogance creates a massive blind spot, preventing them from realizing that this illusion of an easy target is actually the entry point to their own undoing, as they have invited an incredibly sharp, highly resilient psychological force directly into the core of their fragile, manufactured reality. The fatal flaw in the narcissist's strategy is their absolute certainty that they are the only ones running a covert operation in the relationship. While they are busy executing their standard tactical plays, the strategic withholding of affection, the subtle shifts in tone designed to induce anxiety, and the calculated deployment of charm, the super empath is quietly engaging in a highly sophisticated, passive data collection phase. This is not driven by malice or a desire to manipulate. It is the natural, involuntary function of a highly advanced, empathetic operating system. Standard empathy absorbs the emotional climate of a room, but super empathy decodes it. The super empath scans the environment with microscopic precision, registering data points that the average person completely misses. They notice the fraction of a second delay before the narcissist mirrors a look of concern. They catalog the slight, involuntary micro-expressions of contempt that flash across the narcissist's face when someone else receives praise. They track the patterns in the narcissist's speech, mapping the glaring inconsistencies between their grandiose declarations and their actual day-to-day behavior. Because the super empath operates from a baseline of absolute authenticity, they possess an internal calibration system that immediately flags anything artificial. To them, the narcissist's entire persona sounds like a slightly out-of-tune instrument. Yet because of their deep capacity for compassion, the super empath does not immediately weaponize this data. Instead, they store it, quietly building a comprehensive psychological blueprint of the narcissist's mind. They map out the exact boundaries of the narcissist's fragile ego, identifying the core wounds, the deep-seated insecurities, and the specific triggers that the narcissist spends their entire life running from. The narcissist remains completely oblivious to this ongoing intelligence gathering. They look at the super empath's calm demeanor, their attentive listening, and their soft responses, and they genuinely believe their gaslighting is working. They think they are successfully rewriting reality in the empath's mind, completely blind to the fact that the empath is simply watching the performance, taking mental notes, and understanding the mechanics of the illusion better than the magician performing it. The narcissist is essentially walking around a transparent room, completely exposed, while under the impression that they are hidden behind a one-way mirror. Every lie they tell, every false narrative they construct, and every emotional trap they set is cataloged by the super empath, who is accumulating massive amounts of psychological leverage. The super empath understands exactly what makes the narcissist tick, what drives their desperation, and what lies at the bottom of their bottomless void. By the time the relationship progresses, the super empath has inadvertently acquired the complete master key to the narcissist's internal system, holding a detailed, accurate map of a psychological architecture that is built entirely on a foundation of sand, ready for the moment the dynamic inevitably shifts. The transition from a state of nurturing patience to total, absolute detachment is triggered by a singular defining moment, the threshold event of betrayal. A narcissist operates under the assumption that boundaries are elastic, believing they can repeatedly push, exploit, and damage a person without ever reaching a point of no return. When they decide to execute a major betrayal, whether it is a calculated public smear campaign, a devastating act of infidelity, or a cold, unprovoked discard, they do so with the expectation of a specific emotional payload. They anticipate a high-volume reaction filled with tears, desperate demands for closure, begging, or intense anger, all of which serve as highly validating forms of negative supply that confirm their absolute control over the target's emotional state. However, when dealing with a super empath, this act of betrayal does not bend the relationship. It permanently snaps the architecture of the connection. The betrayal acts as an immediate, irreversible psychological trigger that instantly alters the empath's internal operating system. In a fraction of a second, the profound, nurturing empathy that the empath previously extended toward the narcissist is completely and permanently cut off at the source. This is not an emotional reaction driven by spite, vindictiveness, or temporary anger, which are all responses the narcissist knows how to manage and exploit. Instead, it is a clinical, systemic shutdown of access. The super empath's mind recognizes that the narcissist is no longer a damaged individual seeking connection, but a conscious predator seeking destruction. Consequently, the empath immediately shifts out of the role of the caregiver and into a state of absolute, freezing, objective detachment. The narcissist suddenly finds themselves staring into a completely flat, unyielding psychological mirror. The emotional warmth, the deep understanding, and the relentless patience that once defined the interaction vanish entirely, replaced by a cold, analytical observation. When the narcissist attempts to utilize their standard post-betrayal playbook, attempting to shift blame, manufacture guilt, or provoke a dramatic argument, they hit a wall of absolute silence and indifference. The super empath no longer argues, no longer defends their character, and no longer demands explanations. They view the narcissist not with hatred, but with the cold detachment of a scientist observing a behavioral specimen under a microscope. This sudden, total withdrawal of emotional energy leaves the narcissist completely disoriented, as their primary source of psychological validation is instantly vaporized. They are left holding a script that no one is reading anymore, standing before an audience that has completely left the theater. The complete lack of an emotional echo deprives the narcissist of the conflict they require to sustain their distorted reality, forcing them to confront the terrifying weight of their own actions against a backdrop of absolute, impenetrable silence. When the super empath completely detaches, they don't just walk away. They inadvertently leave behind a psychological mirror that forces the narcissist into a state of severe internal collapse. A narcissist survives by projecting a false, idealized version of themselves into the minds of others, and then feeding off the validation that projection returns. They need people to look at them and see power, charm, or tragic victimhood, anything other than the empty reality of their true self. The super empath, during the relationship, provided a highly specialized, compassionate mirror that chose to reflect the potential of who the narcissist could be, extending grace to their deep-seated wounds. But when the betrayal occurs and that grace is permanently revoked, the mirror changes instantly. It drops all filters, all distortions, and all gentle interpretations. It becomes a completely objective, unyielding reflection of the narcissist's raw, unedited psychological reality. Suddenly, every time the narcissist looks at the super empath or tries to interact with them, they are not met with the validation they crave, nor are they met with the dramatic anger that allows them to play the victim. Instead, they are met with a calm, penetrating gaze that sees them exactly as they are: small, deeply insecure, compulsively dishonest, and entirely dependent on the reactions of others to feel alive. This shift strips away the narcissist's grand illusions in an instant. The gaslighting tactics, which rely on the target doubting their own sanity, completely shatter against the rock-solid clarity of the empath's objective stance. When the narcissist tries to rewrite history, the empath doesn't argue. They simply stand firm in the truth, rendering the narcissist's lies completely useless. This lack of an emotional reaction sends a shockwave through the narcissist's entire system, triggering a profound crisis known as narcissistic mortification. Without an emotional echo from the empath, the narcissist is forced to sit in the deafening silence of their own inner void. They look into the empath's eyes and see no hatred, no desire for revenge, and no lingering attachment. Only an overwhelming, clinical indifference. This indifference is the ultimate toxin to a narcissist's ego, because it proves that they have absolutely no power left to affect the empath's state of being. The grand illusions of superiority and control that the narcissist spent a lifetime manufacturing are utterly exposed as a fragile, pathetic defense mechanism. They are left entirely naked before the one person whose validation they valued most, trapped in a reality where their masks have been permanently cracked, forcing them to experience the terrifying weight of their own fundamental inadequacy without any psychological armor left to protect them. The final phase of this dynamic is the permanent structural collapse of the narcissist's psychological operating system. A narcissist relies on a repeatable loop of behavioral manipulation to navigate the world. They trigger a reaction, exploit the vulnerability exposed by that reaction, and use the resulting control to reinforce their fragile sense of superiority. This loop is the oxygen that keeps their false persona alive. But when they betray a super empath and trigger that absolute objective detachment, they find themselves locked in an interaction with an individual who has become entirely immune to their behavioral inputs. The narcissist will naturally attempt to reboot their system by cycling through every manipulation tactic in their arsenal. They will try love bombing and hoovering to see if nostalgia or affection can crack the boundary. They will try severe projection and smear campaigns to see if anger or a need to defend their reputation will force the empath back into the arena. They will even try playing the victim, fabricating medical emergencies or emotional crises to exploit the empath's natural desire to help. But every single one of these inputs fails to deliver a payload. The super empath system simply reads the code, recognizes the predatory intent, and blocks the execution. The narcissist hits an absolute brick wall of indifference every single time. This constant, unyielding failure creates a massive internal crisis for the narcissist, because their ego is built on the absolute conviction that they can bend anyone to their will if they just find the right lever. When they realize that there is no lever, no button, and no trigger that can elicit even a flicker of emotion from the empath, their internal confidence is completely dismantled. The narcissist's mind begins to loop in a state of hyperfixation and obsession. They cannot process the reality of a target they could not break, and this obsession eats away at their mental clarity. Even if they attempt to move on to new, less perceptive targets to rebuild their depleted ego, the ghost of this failure haunts every subsequent interaction. The new sources of supply feel shallow, predictable, and ultimately unfulfilling, because the narcissist carries the permanent underlying awareness that they encountered a truly superior psychological force and were completely outmatched. They are left with a lingering, pervasive terror of the empath, knowing that there is someone out there who holds the definitive truth of their inadequacy and who looks at their grand performance with nothing more than clinical pity. This realization permanently damages the narcissist's ability to fully believe in their own illusions of grandeur ever again, trapping them in a state of chronic insecurity